Welcome back to season 4 of Connecting with Purpose, where we're putting founders first, telling the stories of the humans behind the business. From magic moments to purpose, looking back on their entrepreneurial roller coaster to the possibilities ahead. We'll learn how these leaders have navigated their journeys up, around, and away from the performance precipice to achieve growth, results, and impact they're really proud of. Right, welcome everyone. Welcome back to season 4 of Connecting with Purpose. I've been really looking forward to this conversation with Keith Bearden, who is the CEO and owner of Alter Eco Foods. And these guys produce the cleanest, greenest snacks on earth. Chocolate bars, truffles, granola, quinoa. And I can attest from personal experience, having polished off one of their chocolate bars in one sitting, how incredible their snacks taste. Most importantly, though, everything they do is organic, 100% produced from regenerative agriculture and fair trade methods, with little to no waste and full carbon offset. So it really is truly cleanest and greenest. Keith is, as you're going to see very soon, one of these positive energy givers. So as you can imagine, we forged a solid connection when we met earlier this year, I think, at the Real Leaders Impact Conference in San Diego. And we're going to learn more about Keith's journey today, which is from taking on this incredible company, what led to him coming to this place. He's had an extremely diverse and rich career spanning from tech and CPG and executive roles and CEO roles to private equity. And from what I can see, there's just been this kind of growing golden thread connecting all these things on impact. And so I'm really intrigued that with so many twists and turns and such a rich history, whether Keith himself has ever got to the point where he's become, as I call, an empty achiever, or he's managed to just completely avoid that performance precipice altogether. Because regardless of what the answer is, there's some lessons and learning for all of us. So Keith, really excited to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us on season 4 of Connecting with Purpose.
I am so happy to be here. I'm excited about this. I love having these conversations. And as you said, I mean, I think it was great when we met in San Diego. A lot of good connections came out of there, and I'm really happy that we're continuing to foster those.
Yes, 100%. Same. And I've enjoyed a few conversations with folks literally from that same very room. We're all hanging out. So as you know, we kick off with magic moments. The audience knows this, but the quick headlines for any new folks are: magic moments are moments that when you look back on life with the benefit of time, if you had to give them a score, you give them a 10 out of 10. And that's maybe because they were literally magic in the purest sense of the word, in terms of it being like an optimal experience and you performing at your very, very best, or something just really incredible was happening. But equally often, magic moments can be overcoming severe challenges, even sometimes trauma or tragedy. And so the reason you give them a 10 out of 10 is because of, one, how you kind of handled that moment or period of time, and two, because of the impact they had on what came next. So when you look back, Keith, if you were to pick 3 magic moments that kind of shaped your journey, that were defining in terms of how you've got to where you are now, please describe what those moments were, what it was about them that made it made magic, and then if you had to give them a name, what would you call them?
The name part's kind of difficult, but I'll take my best shot at it. So one of the ones that sticks out in my mind so clearly today, as it did when it actually happened when I was about 12 years old, was I grew up in a very, very rural part of Tennessee. Very rural. No stoplights, no grocery stores, with the exception of, and that's part of the magic moment, is a little country store that my grandfather owned. And so this little country store sold everything from feed to gasoline to bread and eggs and milk. But being a very rural farming community, most of those people farmed for a living. And so if you're a farmer, you sell your crop once a year. My grandfather would give these people credit all year long. And then when they sold their crop, they would come in and pay him. When I was 12 years old, he decided he was ready to retire, and he sold his country store to a local guy in the community. I'd known him my whole life as well. Sell the receivables, he took those with him. And I came in the house, my grandparents' house, one day after my grandfather had sold the store, and my mom was sitting at the kitchen table dividing the receipts by the different families, and she was going to write a letter and send it to them and let them know that my grandfather had sold the store and that this is how much they owed him. And my grandfather was with me. We had been out in the field, and we walk in, and my grandfather looked at my mom and he said, "Sis, what are you doing?" He always called my mom sis. "Sis, what are you doing?" So she explained, and he said, "Oh, you can just throw those away, honey." And she said, "Well, Daddy, they owe you a lot of money." And he said, "They know how much they owe me." He said, "And if they have the money, they'll pay me." But honest people. He said, "And if they don't have the money, they need it more than I do."
Hmm.
And that element of compassion and empathy, and my grandfather was a leader in the community because of the store and because of the things he did in the community. And I defined that, and maybe this is the name for it, is servant leadership.
Hmm.
He served that whole community. I mean, dozens and dozens of families. He'd come and pay him. Probably all. I didn't track that, but my grandfather didn't care. He said if they needed it more than him, he was happy to let that go.
Amazing. Gosh, I mean, you won't find that in any MBA class on best practices for business,
No,
but
no.
it's a best practice, as you said, for human connection, for empathy, compassion, and trust at the end of the
Hmm.
day.
Yeah.
And so yeah, servant leadership's brilliant name for that. Awesome. We'll weave these together, have a conversation with you about them at the end. So yeah, I'm intrigued for number 2 now. That was a
Well,
great one.
number two. So I graduated from university with an undergraduate degree in computer science. Started my career in IT, and I went to work for the Dow Chemical Company, very large global corporation. And I was given the opportunity to go early in my career with Dow, and I was with Dow for about 15 years. So very early in that journey, I was given the opportunity to move into the internal audit department. And so it was supposed to be a 3-year rotation because as an auditor, we traveled an average of 40 weeks a year.
Mm.
And we covered the globe. So I got to see and experience a lot of different places. But because we traveled so much, it was a rotational job because you kind of would burn out if you did that forever. And so 2.5 years into this 3-year rotation, I had the corporate auditor come to me and ask me if I would be willing to extend my rotation for 5 years and relocate to Antwerp, Belgium, and open up the very first audit department outside of the corporate headquarters.
Wow.
I was 29 years old, youngest expat that the Dow Chemical Company had ever had by a long shot. But I was dating my wife at the time, and we had not even talked about getting married. And my boss, the corporate auditor, said, "I'm just going to be really upfront with you. We'll pay to move your wife. We won't pay to move your girlfriend."
Nudge.
Yeah. So I was actually out of town when I received the offer. So I called my now wife at that evening, and I said, I just got a really interesting promotion today to the European area audit manager. And, or I said to an audit manager. I didn't throw Europe in there at that point. And she said, "That's great." I said, "Well, there's one catch." And she said, "What's that?" And I said, "It's located in Antwerp, Belgium." And she didn't even hesitate. The next question was, "Well, when do we move?"
Wow. Awesome.
So we've been married 35 years now. And so that was that, number one, told me that she was ready. Number two, it introduced a risk into both my personal life and my career that I had not been a manager. I'd never lived anywhere except my little rural place in Tennessee and Midland, Michigan. And the reason I chose Dow Chemical coming out of college was that it was a small town. Midland, Michigan was a town of about 40,000 people. The other offers I had were in Washington, D.C., Newark, New Jersey, Dallas, and Atlanta. And I couldn't see this little farm boy going to one of those big cities. And now here I was 3 years later going to move to Europe.
Brilliant.
So that was to give it a name, I guess it was, you know, testing the waters or risk reward.
The yeah, I love both of those. But based upon what her response was, you'd said, the hook in that whole conversation was the one catch. And I was just thinking, that's the name for it after you gave what her answer was, because it's the catch to whether or not this is going to work. But actually, she was the catch, right? I
Yeah.
mean, because the fact that she answered in that way, you didn't have to say, yeah, so, will you marry me and will you come? She's like, I'm in. When do we go?
Yeah.
Which is amazing. And yeah, awesome. I mean, I'm excited to hear more about that experience of testing the waters. All right, what about number three?
Well, number three, we came back from Europe after 5 years, and we figured, we're going to be in Midland, Michigan for a long time. And because that's where Dow's corporate headquarters were. So we bought land, we built a house, settled down, and we had been in our brand new, beautifully designed, beautifully architected house for about 18 months. And we woke up to go to work one day, and my wife looked at me and she said, "I don't want to live in Midland, Michigan the rest of my life. There's too much world out there to explore." And so I said, "Okay, well, you followed me to Europe. Where do you want to go?" And she said, "I don't know, but let's figure it out."
Hmm.
And in a few short months, we quit our jobs at Dow, sold our house, packed up our kids who were 3 and 5 because they were both born in Belgium, and moved to Portland, Oregon by choice. No job, no house, just moved to Oregon. And I started my own company there. And so that was my first foray into being an entrepreneur. And it turned out that that was the best move I've ever made in my career, because I found that I had an experience set that could help companies navigate through a lot of different things. And it was mostly small to mid-sized companies, as little as 1 or 2 million in revenue, up to 50 or 60. I think the largest company I consulted with was about 100 million in revenue. And I found that being a consultant was one of the most rewarding periods of my career, because I genuinely felt like every time I left a company, they were better off than when I went in.
Yeah.
So
So
a name for that one would probably be, I mean, it could be entrepreneurship, it could be, but it was really more about being able to give something to these companies that they couldn't do on their own.
mm, yeah. Yeah, and that's, I mean, it was also kind of for your life, kind of new beginnings, right? Just sort of another chapter, and um,
Definitely. That's what
what's
got me into food and beverage, because
right.
almost all of well, not all, but a lot of the companies that I consulted with were food and beverage companies.
Mm,
The Pacific Northwest is just littered with small food and beverage companies. And so I consulted with a lot of them. And I built that consulting company actually up to about 12 C-level executives. And then when one of my personal clients, Yogi T, offered me the position to run their international operation, I actually sold the consulting company to the first guy I hired.
hmm.
That was in 2008, and it still exists today.
Oh, brilliant, brilliant. I know how that feels actually. Firstly, the challenges around exiting something, but the reward of being able to see it continue beyond
Hmm.
what you built is awesome. And so what I'm going to do is I was jotting down a few words across all of these experiences. So they're not necessarily, well, they're kind of in order, but they're not meant to be necessarily in order. These represent some sense of your characteristics, some things that you've exhibited over the years that no doubt have served you well. I'm just going to read them off and then just sort of ask you a question as to which of those you feel you've had to lean into the most
Okay.
to sort of guide your experience to date. So here's some words: compassion, empathy, service, trust, courage, belief, adventure, exploration, adaptable expertise, drive for impact, empowerment. Um, Lots there, lots
Hmm.
of sort of best self. But out of all of those things, which are the ones that stand out most to you? If you had to narrow it down to a top three that
Hmm.
you couldn't live without, what would those be for you?
Well, I think courage definitely stands out because, I was running people looked at me, my parents especially, when I decided to leave Dow Chemical. I was the youngest expat the company ever had. I was a director when I was 35, reporting to a vice president. All my peers were in their 50s, and I left.
Yeah.
And my parents are like, "Have you lost your mind? You could be a vice president. You could be the CEO of Dow Chemical." Maybe, but we wanted a different challenge. We wanted something bigger than that from a personal perspective. So the
Yes.
courage to leave the safety and security of that and go out and do something different. And heaven, heaven help me starting my own company. you
Yeah.
know, I mean, that's a leap of faith that, you got to believe in yourself a lot. And I had a lot of encouragement. My wife is my rock and encourages me every day. But that took a lot of courage. And then building a successful consulting business, and I mean, we were doing almost 4 million in revenue, and to sell that and pack up the kids and move back to Europe to run the international operation for Yogi Tea when I'd never been a CEO in the consumer packaged goods space. That was another bit of courage and leap of faith, if you will. So courage is one that really stands out. Um, I have, in everything I've ever done, I feel like I've taken that empathy that my grandfather taught me with me in everything I've ever done. I think it serves me very well. I treat my customers as true customers, and to the degree that the customer is always right, I try to make it that way. I always try to find a way for everything to be a win-win. I treat all of the employees of every company I've ever run as if they were as much of an owner as I was, or as much of a leader as I was. And I believe in empowering. I don't believe in micromanaging. Number one, I don't like to be micromanaged. I've had one position in my career where I was very, very successful in it, but I was micromanaged to a point that it wasn't who I was.
Yeah.
And I walked away from it. I was making a lot of money and I just walked away. So I think empathy is a big part. Adventure. I mean, we love having an adventure. It keeps things interesting. I have a philosophy in life. I've had the opportunity several times to be CEOs for private equity portfolio companies, for companies that I've acquired, for different companies. I had a friend of mine look at my LinkedIn profile one time, and he's like, "Dude, you cannot keep a job, can you?" I'm like, well, that's kind of the purpose, is I try to work myself out of these jobs. But he's like, you look at your LinkedIn profile, every couple of years you're changing jobs. You just cannot keep a job. So, but I have this philosophy in life, and I've had it since the beginning, is never say no until you have to.
Mm.
So if somebody brings me an opportunity, and I get contacted by recruiters all the time, and different things, and they'll say, "Hey, I've got this great opportunity. Are you willing to listen to it?" And I'm like, "Sure, I'm willing to listen." It might be the best thing that life ever put in front of me. I will never say no until I have to.
Yeah. Well, I love I mean, I love the combination of these three. The last one around adventure, which goes a little bit with courage, right? Because adventure, sort of by definition, is leaning into the uncertain and the unknown,
Hmm.
and exploring and just kind of finding your way, and being able to be comfortable enough in that liminal space, because you've got some belief in what sits beyond that, and that it aligns to your own, if you like, your own capabilities and ability to create the future you want, even though you don't know yet what it is.
Hmm.
And so adventure and courage obviously somewhat go together, but they're really nicely kind of glued together with empathy, because that whole piece of truly not just understanding other people, but understanding how they feel, and then using that as an opportunity to connect better with them, to challenge them, to have them experience some success, to find, as you said, always look for the win-win, is one of the reasons that you can say yes until you have to say no, right? You don't have to say no until you have to say no.
Right.
And so that just, you've given yourself permission, and you give other people permission just to essentially just to be themselves, and to have that courage and belief to try new things, lean into the uncertain, and sort of back yourself along the way. And as you said, along the whole journey, your wife's been there, which is brilliant, because it brings you all the way back, right to that second magic moment. So much here, and I'm just interested in. I talked a little bit at the very beginning about this kind of performance precipice and empty achiever, and this is just language I came up with from my own experience, which, by the way, was so interesting, because we're obviously just lived in completely different places. My kids are now the age that your kids were way back then, when you mine are 3 and 6, right? So I'm playing the old dad game. But what we share in common is I left an investment banking job just as I got promoted to VP, to found, well, I'd already founded, but to grow, to commit myself full time to running a non-profit in the educational system. And thought, oh, if I don't do it now, it's not going to happen. I really believe in it. I want to give these kids this opportunity that I was handed on a plate. And I'll do it for a couple of years. And of course, 15 years later, I was still doing it, but I have subsequently been able to to leave that behind, and found a brilliant person to take it over, and it continues to impact. And that sense of legacy and impact is one of the things I'm proudest of. So we share actually quite a few things, but from completely different kind of time periods and sectors
Mm-hmm.
and geographies. But what I also learned in that process was when the company had got to almost to its peak of performance in terms of any of the metrics you might be measuring, number of kids, how often we were serving them, the outcomes they were experiencing, even starting to see now kids graduating and go to college that have been in the program that otherwise most likely would not have done. On the outside, everything looked great, but on the inside, I was empty, and I call it empty achiever. And it's when you reach this point where the performance precipice, where you're at the top of potentially so many things, in terms of how you're handling everything, what's going on, the impact the organization's having, but you've kind of ended up playing out of position for too long. And as a result, you just feel empty. And the only way forward is to navigate your way off the precipice, because otherwise you just slip down, and that emptiness can fill with toxicity, and that's what you want to avoid, obviously. My question is, have you ever experienced that yourself?
Oh, yeah.
And if so, what did you do how did you notice it? And then what did you do to sort of navigate your way off the cliff? And if you haven't, how have you avoided it?
Well, no, I have. I think everybody, if you've got a very long career, you've had times where you've gotten into that position where it's not fulfilling. It doesn't represent who you are as an individual. I mentioned that I was a CEO for North America for a very large international company. And the global CEO was very micromanaging. And that wasn't the worst part of it. One of the other traits that I've always tried to carry forward in everything I've done is honesty and integrity. And I wouldn't say that this company was dishonest, but they were willing to skirt around the edges a bit. And I never really felt comfortable with some of the things that were going on. And there was a very, very, very small straw that broke the camel's back for me. I was in New York with the global CEO visiting a customer. And after the meeting, he was flying back to Europe and I was flying back to Atlanta. And I dropped him off at the international terminal at JFK. And for whatever reason, he leaned over and looked at the gas gauge and he's like, "Oh, good, it still says full. You can just turn it back in." And I said, "Well, I've got plenty of time. I'll go fill it up with gas." He's like, "Well, it says full. You can just tell him it's full." And I said, "I can't do that. It's not who I am." And he's like, "Well, then fine. Waste your time and go find a gas station." As I was driving off, I was already writing my resignation letter in my head.
Yeah. So that instance, there was two core things. One was just a misalignment of values in terms of your personal values, the things you cherish and how you hold yourself accountable and how you want to show up for other people, versus other very senior people, influential people in the business that had created a culture that had values that didn't align with that, especially around integrity and honesty. And in addition to the misalignment of values, there was just a ways of working that just did not fit for you. So your solution there in that instance, I guess, was the resignation letter.
I just exited, but at that point, what we did was we moved back to Tennessee and took over my family farm. And I just completely walked away from business for a little bit. And we have a farm family since 1835.
Wow.
And my dad's health had gotten not to be the greatest. And so I decided, let's go back to the farm. Let's
Hmm.
go back to the roots. And let's revisit who we are, who I am, what I stand for, and how we want to live out the rest of our life.
Hmm.
And I sort of thought about semi-retirement, but I got really bored really quickly.
This is so incredibly relevant to Purpose Fused and what we do, because one of the things that we help leaders with is, outside of resigning and taking space and going back to your roots and back to your family farm, to revisit who you really are, what you really stand for, what you really want life to look like. The reality for lots of people, in part because they're high achievers, because they're doing so well, is what got them here won't get them there, but they're stuck where they're at because the first thing they can't do is step back to reframe their perspective and just look at their whole self and whole life and really look at, well, why am I doing this? When am I at my best? How can I align more of being at my best to the things that have meaning to me and that actually matter to me? How can that drive value into the business and the people that I work with and elevate opportunities for others? And so what would that look like? And therefore, what would be the options for me, and am I willing to commit to those? And that doesn't mean necessarily quitting your job. It
No.
means taking the space to rethink so you can
Hmm.
just realign lots of small intentional actions every day, reframe your mindset to one that aligns to that purpose, and you climb out, you navigate away from the performance precipice, because every single small action has an impact. And you instead of feeling lost and buried and overwhelmed and maybe everything's in conflict, you just feel you're working hard, but it's progressing, it's impacting, it's creating momentum, and that in turn continues to fuel your performance. So you're
Hmm.
sort of filling yourself up and performing better versus squeezing yourself dry, which, by the way, then reflects how you manage and lead.
Oh, 100%. And as you can imagine, moving back to the farm, it was a shift from mostly mental, strategic, to hard physical work. We restored the original log cabin that was built before the Civil War. And I rented a crane, learned how to drive a crane, and took it down one log at a time. You know, I knew how to do most of the farm work because I grew up on a farm. But restoring a log cabin, I'd never done that before. I
Yeah.
learned a lot in the process, but it was so rewarding because we saw progress every day. You'd see things moving forward. And then when I decided that, okay, I'm ready to jump back into the game, I contacted some people that I knew in private equity that I had a lot of respect for and that I trusted. And I said, I'm ready to get back in. So if anything comes along, let me know. And that's how it kind of, I to the point I've led several companies now. you know
Right. Yeah. Yeah. They're looking at the resume as a positive,
yes.
as diversity of experience that can apply to the portfolio. So we've talked about some of these best self characteristics. I'm interested just in sort of how purpose has shown up for you. We have our own definition of that, which is passion plus impact plus application, which takes a lot of unpacking. But the outcome of it is that it's about living intentionally at the intersection between your passions and the impact that you want to have.
Hmm.
And when that's within a career where you get paid to do that, it's brilliant because it aligns with sort of flow and contributions and productivity and elevating others, and it makes work not feel like work. It's just a way that you live every day and get paid for it. How do you think your purpose has shaped your journey, and has that been quite implicit and just sort of below the surface, or has it been quite explicit and you've been really clear on what that is and you've used it to guide decisions?
I would actually say I didn't even really know what the purpose was until until I started consulting, and my purpose has changed. When I started consulting, my purpose was to help companies be successful, and through whatever means that I could bring to the table. And I remember when I first met the guys at Yogi Tea, I got a phone call from the IT director at Yogi Tea saying, "Hey, I was given your name by somebody that says you know a lot about ERP systems and that you can help us with ERP implementation." And I said, "I do know a lot about ERP systems, and yes, I can probably help you." He said, "Well, we're going to implement SAP. And if you know anything about ERP systems, SAP is the system, it's a German company, and it's the system that companies like Dow Chemical and General Motors and Ford and BASF run. It's not a system that companies like Yogi Tea, that is sub $100 million in revenue at the time, run. It is a very complex, very expensive, very difficult to manage system without a huge IT staff." So I said, how did you go about selecting SAP? And he gave me his answers. And I said, "I tell you what, I will meet with you and your team, and I'll give you my assessment as to whether or not I can help you." So I went and spent a couple of days at Yogi Tea and doing the interviews with different staff. And I went into the CEO and I said, "Okay, I can't help you with SAP." And he said, "Why? I thought you knew these systems." I said, "I do." I said, "But I'm in the business of helping companies succeed, not helping them fail. And you will fail miserably if you try to implement SAP." And he said, "So let me get this straight. You're a consultant. You charge whatever per hour. How much money would you make off of us?" I said, "Oh, several $100,000. I said, "But I would help you fail, and I don't do that." And he said, "Can you help us succeed?" And I said, "Oh, I can. But it's first figuring out what you really need." And he said, "Okay, when can you start?" And then went from that to actually running Yogi Tea International for 7 years. So I built that level of trust and compassion with the people that I helped be successful. So my purpose was to help companies be successful. But after I got into the food and beverage industry, I still want to help companies be successful and help people be successful. But I developed a real passion for regenerative agriculture, helping smallholder farmers, trying to do what we could with our little footprint of our products to mitigate climate change. And so that was why I was drawn to companies like Earth Circle Organics and American Botanicals and Alter Eco, because that's what we stand for.
Yeah.
And so I've done so many speaking engagements and podcasts now over the past year about how important it is for us as a society to embrace regenerative agriculture, to embrace dynamic agroforestry, to do everything we can to embrace sustainability. Because if we don't, we're going to destroy the planet. We're well on our way. And we've got to figure out how to reverse this. And not for me. I mean, it's not, the planet's not going to fall down before I'm dead and gone. But I have a 2-year-old granddaughter. It may not be a lot. There may not be enough food to feed the people of the planet by the time she gets to be an adult if we don't do something differently.
Yeah, and
So
that
my purpose has
grounds that
changed.
impact in meaning.
My purpose has really changed in terms of, yes, I want to make everything I do successful and make the people around me successful. but I want to get the message out that we're in a crisis that we can't ignore anymore.
Yeah, 100%. Well, so there's one nuance to this, and this is just because I'm immersed in this space, which I would challenge you on, which is actually your purpose hasn't changed. It's the application of your purpose that's changed.
Okay.
Because the purpose that we talk about is this sort of innate, inside out sense of best self that makes a difference, right? And over life, as different chapters, different companies, different geographies, different people in your life, at home, in the community, or at work, the application of your purpose, how you bring it to life, is different, but the purpose is the same. And I'm not suggesting this is exactly what it is, but your purpose is certainly something around, empathizing with people and empowering them to succeed and make an impact, right? I mean, that's been the truth as long back as you can probably think, from learning from your granddad, which is what he was doing. And we've just applied it differently, which is why the model is passion plus impact plus application, because it's the application bit that changes. And so the value in understanding, which is understanding your top values and your top behaviors, that the empathy and the compassion and the integrity and the honesty and the empowerment and this desire to leave people and companies and things in a better place, that's what makes up your purpose. And you have a very rich career and LinkedIn profile that shows many, many different ways that you've done that. So again, it's just a tweak, but it's important to how we help people apply that on a regular basis. And so with that in mind, looking forward, we've done a lot of kind of looking back into where we are now. Like, what are you possibilities ahead? Like, what are you most excited about?
It's interesting because I'm at a point in my career where, my brother asks me all the time, when are you going to retire? And he's 5 years younger than me, and he's already retired. And my answer is, when I'm not having fun anymore. But I'm having way too much fun. I love what I do. Going forward, I would love to continue to build on Alter Eco, but also bring that same message of what Alter Eco stands for to other companies. I mean, it would be great if Hershey's and Mars, focusing on the chocolate industry, it would be great if they embraced regenerative agriculture and agroforestry the same way we do.
Yeah.
That would move the needle.
Hugely, yeah.
So I'm out there making these presentations, talking about it as much as I can. I was at a Reuters event last week in Minneapolis. I'm going to Vegas next week for Supply Side Global. I take every opportunity I can to get in front of people and prophesize this message that we all need to figure out how to and somebody asked me earlier today, they said, well, how can I make an impact? You can make an impact by voting with your dollars. You can support companies that are doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And if you do that, and if the market share of those companies that aren't doing the right thing starts to decline, guess what? They'll start doing the right thing.
No, 100%. I think this is the really important part of impact that people need to understand. One is you've got to live it to give it, which you fully embrace. Two, if you want to use Richard Yellen's messaging from Real Leaders, he's another one of the guys in the community there, but he sort of talks about turning missions into movements. To turn a mission into movement, you've got to inspire others. You've got to ignite something. You've got to spark something that reframes that message to them so they start seeing things differently. And that's why you're on the road doing this, which is an incredible thing, right? Because you don't have to do that for Alter Eco at all. I mean, there's some benefits to it in terms of networks and things, but it's about, this is what we're doing, this is how you can do it, and this is the impact it will make. And it's that there's an inspiration piece there to get other people to embrace that impact. And I think the important part of the last thing that you said, and this is one of the 6 spheres of impact that we look at in our work, from self and friends and family to your work role, your broader workplace, the community, the last one is money. And it's money for a reason, because literally every dollar you spend can do good or bad, right?
Hmm.
And even for just buying some basics, most of us have a choice. Once you get beyond survival mode and you just have a little bit more discretionary income, you can be intentional about how you choose to spend that, how you choose to invest that, etc.,
Hmm.
etc. So little things, little purchases, if everybody did them, would make a huge impact. Just like
Oh
small
yeah,
actions, if everyone aligned to small
absolutely.
actions, they'd make a huge impact.
I tell people all the time, you buy an Alter Eco bar, you're improving the planet one chocolate bar at a time.
One yummy, delicious bite at a time. And then try not to eat the whole bar in 5 minutes like I did, which is a challenge, by the way, everybody. Um, okay, what's getting in the way? What's getting in the way? You're having fun. Um,
Yeah,
you're
I
on the
mean,
road. You're inspiring others. What's a roadblock?
not to get too deep into political discussions, but the administration of the United States right now, they don't embrace climate change. They don't acknowledge it even. They're putting tariffs out. And don't get me wrong, I understand the need to build up manufacturing in the United States and to support a more robust economy that's not just a service and tech economy. But that takes years and decades in the making. You don't do it by just slapping a 50% tariff on India or a 39% tariff on Switzerland. It's not the way it works. And so those headwinds are going to ultimately force consumers to be more c- conscious about the money that they spend, because these tariffs are going to drive food inflation. And we haven't seen it yet because they just kind of went into, it takes, in the food industry, it takes anywhere from 90 to 120 days for a price change to flow through the system. We're going to start seeing it right now.
Mm,
And if they don't get overturned by the Supreme Court in their ruling in November, there's some economic analyst out there that's saying food inflation could hit as much as 25% by the first quarter of next year.
yeah, yeah. Which for people on tight budgets, which is a large percentage of people,
Yeah.
is a big negative impact. Yeah. Yeah, and
So
no
that's
doubt a huge headwind for you in managing
yeah,
the business.
it is. And I mean, we'll survive. I mean, we'll figure out how to navigate through it. But my my servant leadership view of things in the world, inspired largely by my grandfather, is I feel for the people that don't have the money, that
Yeah.
don't have a means of supporting themselves. I mean, if everything went to hell in a handbasket, um, we could live off the farm. Most people can't do that.
Yeah, no, 100%. That's exactly where my mind goes with it as well. And then in that servant leadership in the workplace, when you think about the folks you've got who are driving this change forward, the internally, if you like, your staff and other leaders, externally, partners, stakeholders, etc.
Hmm.
Um, what what are you seeing as their needs, and how are you helping kind of keep everybody, if you like, aligned and focused and energized and on track?
I think energized is the key word there. Alignment, my team is so aligned to our mission. I've got this Alter Eco vest on, and when I went to get these ordered for one of our trade shows that we went to, the first question I got was, "Is it organic cotton?" And I said, "Well, it's Patagonia." "Okay, we'll wear Patagonia, but don't be bringing me this imported polyester stuff. It's like it's got to be the real thing, or we're not going to wear it." So
Awesome.
that's how aligned my team is
Yeah,
around
brilliant.
the mission of what we stand for. But keeping them positive, keeping them energized, with all these headwinds, you know, and I'm a very transparent leader in terms of I share everything with everybody.
Yeah.
You know, I feel the more information they have, the better decisions they can make.
Yeah.
And fortunately, knock on wood, we we're still growing quite rapidly. I mean, our sales are phenomenal. Our customers are loyal. We're going into more and more retailers. And so they see the positives. They understand the headwinds that we're facing, and we all are just very optimistic that hopefully something will turn it around.
Yeah. And
Hope is
it's
not
so,
a strategy, though, of course.
no,
So
well, no, even though
I'm also
hope's not a
planning
strategy,
for
but
the worst.
it does pull people along, and one of the ways to energize people outside of just being positive and being transparent and just having this unwavering belief in, you know,
Mhm.
the impact that you guys are having, so they actually see it. Um, there's also there's an energy component just to how we contribute. So there's an alignment thing around clarity and mindset, right, which they've got 100%. There's another energy piece about how you actually contribute, not necessarily what you do, but how you do it. And
Mhm.
that's where I see often, that's where there's sometimes some unlocks,
Yeah.
even with the best performing teams, because we're so focused on what we're doing that aligns usually, hopefully, to the impact that we're looking to have.
Mhm.
Um, well, how else can we improve? Well, we're human, so we can always improve. There's always ways we can work
Mhm.
better. So what are our ways of working? How am I contributing? How are you contributing? And it brings me back to my sports days of like the positions on the field, right?
Yeah.
We're all playing the same game, but we all have slightly different things to contribute. And when we understand how to
Mhm.
gel those together and get into our lane, that's energizing because we
Mhm.
perform better. Other people can support us better. We can support them better, and we get more done. But it makes us feel good in the process. And it's feeling good and performing
Absolutely.
better that are kind of two key things. And there's often one piece of that missing.
Mhm. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so I appreciate you calling that word out. I use energy a lot. So let's close out. We've got 1 minute left. So that means one question. Which one am I going to pick? I have to go with the words of wisdom, the parting message. If there's one thing you wanted to leave our audience with today, Keith, what would it be?
Be true to who you are. Always be true to yourself.
Brilliant. Absolutely love that. End with a bit of reality, a bit of authenticity. Be true to who you are and be true to yourself. Love that. I think this is the third time in a row I'm like, we've got 1 minute left, so so I maybe got to think through that a little bit. But Keith, thank you so much. I really enjoyed our conversation. I know you're super busy on the road, etc. So I really appreciate you committing the time, and our audience is going to love this.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Excellent.
And
Glad to hear.
I'm sure we'll cross paths here again soon.
I hope we do. I really do, and I look forward to that.
All right. Thank you.
Bye, Keith.
Bye-bye.